I saw that. We lost to just about every element of that matchup. They outcoached us. They outplayed us. They were better fundamentally, tackling and so forth.
Slade's pumping. He is floating it, and it's complete to Huff at the 50, the 45. He's on his feet at the 30, the 20. Cuts back at the 10, the 5. He is in. Darren Sproles.
We got our ass kicked. I'll simply say it like that.
We got work to do, obviously, as we come here with one agenda, and that's to play winning football, and obviously we didn't do that today.
The Steelers are coming off a bad loss to the Eagles in Philly last Sunday, but their offense getting a big boost this weekend. LeVeon Bell returns from his 3-game suspension. Stephen A., what do you expect from the Steelers with Bell returning?
Well, first of all, I expect the running game to return. D'Angelo Williams has struggled at least the last couple of weeks or so because he is 33 years of age and he's had to carry a hefty workload. But I expect the Steelers defense to look a little bit better. Alex Smith doesn't make a lot of mistakes, but he's not a game changer per se, even though he has the potential to do a lot of different things. In the end, what it comes down to is that the Steelers were an absolute embarrassment last week. I was incredibly ashamed of what I saw against the Philadelphia Eagles. They should have been ashamed of themselves. And they should come out ready to play football this week because, as far as I'm concerned, they've had 2 weeks off because they certainly didn't show up last week. It was just a disgraceful performance, maybe the worst performance I ever saw by this team in the Mike Tomlin era. I think they know it. I think everybody else knows it, and we'll see what happens. Marcus Peters is no joke for Kansas City. Antonio Brown and others should have their work cut out for them. Marcus Wheaton doesn't need to be dropping 3 passes like he did before. He needs to do better and help out Antonio Brown. We'll see what happens, but LeVeon Bell is definitely going to be an upgrade, if for no other reason, not just because he's gifted, but because he brings fresh legs, per se, to the equation, and they desperately need that from the running back spot, as well as catching passes out of the backfield. I think it helps, and I think as a result, the Steelers win this game.
Chiefs are just a good team, and I love this game, and it's tempting to take them against the Steelers the way the Steelers looked last week, and given what the Chiefs bring to the table. However, I think, Stephen A., as you pointed out, they were humiliated, the Steelers were. Yes, at Philly, but still in an all-Pennsylvania rivalry-type game, they were humiliated. They're coming home. They have the best running back in the game, and apologies to Adrian Peterson, even before his weak numbers so far this year, if you want to blame the Minnesota offensive line. But when LeVeon Bell, over the last several seasons, has been on the field, I can't believe anyone would argue another running back over him. He is clearly the best running back in the game, all-around running back in the game. You're getting that guy back after you've been humiliated in a rivalry game, a high-profile game because the quality of your opponent. I love this matchup. I think the Steelers win in an overtime-type game. It goes down to the wire, maybe overtime, and I think the Steelers pull it out. I think LeVeon Bell is a big boost for them.
Well, I hope he is, because he needs to be. He's got a lot of making up to do, because remember, even though he's coming back, it's not like he was coming back from injury. He got injured last year, missed the second half of the season because of it. He always seems to get injured against Cincinnati because of their low blow, the low blows that they throw in his direction in some fashion. But in this particular game, he's been out for the first 3 games of the season because he was suspended, weed issues and beyond. So he's got some making up to do. He's got to be dependable. He's got to be somebody that the Steelers can rely upon, because a legitimate argument could be made is that the Steelers have underachieved in the years that he's been there, because this wasn't the first time he's been suspended. So he's got to step up to the plate and do everything that he can to make amends. And he clearly has the talent to do so, and I think he'll put it off.
Their defense has got to get a lot better. Last year it's like, well, if they have a bend but don't break defense and they can stay healthy on offense, maybe they could go all the way. It didn't happen. They couldn't stay healthy on offense. Still really good. And the defense wasn't enough to overcome that. This year they showed improvement early against the run, and you had reason to believe, boy, this Pittsburgh defense is coming around, and then it was nowhere to be seen against Philadelphia last week. So that's the big if there is, does the Steelers defense show up against the Chiefs? Assuming it's a bend but don't break style defense, I think they can win this game.
After last weekend, they're certainly going to be focused, and we know Le'Veon Bell have fresh legs. But I want to get to another subject. We asked you guys earlier in the show if you are buying Dez Bryant's excuse. Max and I were buying it. The results are in. America is with Stephen A. 69% say no, not buying Dez's excuse. Stephen A., your thoughts?
Well, like I said, I'm not judging him harshly or whatever. My reason for not buying it is that it's still unacceptable. It's only acceptable in the world of Jason Garrett because even though you might say something to reprimand him, at the end of the day, you ain't going to really do anything because no one has any reason to fear Jason Garrett because they consider him a puppet for Jerry Jones. That's really what this comes down to, and they need a firm hand at the head coaching position.
It's not an issue of me buying the excuse. It's an immature decision he made. It's a bad decision. He should make better decisions. But does it reflect the right stuff about Des Bryant? Is that the kind of guy you want on your squad? I think the answer is yes. He'll do anything, including avoiding MRIs, whatever, to stay on the field for his teammates and his team. You want that guy.
And that's also where I agreed with you, not the actual buying it part, but what you just explained.
We really don't have reason to trust the NFL, and I don't think they mind either way. At the end of the day, they're going to do what they have to do to make their money and to make as much money as they can for the owners. And our union is going to do what they can to protect the interests of the players and the rights of the players and help them make as much money as possible. And that's the way it's always going to be. They're a bottom line business. If you can increase their bottom line, then they'll love you. They'll do everything they can to put you out more, to market you, to make sure the fans buy your jersey, to put your jersey out because it makes them more money. If you're not making them money, then at the end of the day, they're going to find somebody else.
That was Richard Sherman on the Players Tribune blasting the NFL for their relationship with the players. Will, I want to start with you here. What was your reaction to Sherman's comments?
You know, well, I'll tell you my reaction, first of all, was that it was so. I mean, what's your point, Richard? That you didn't just describe the NFL, you described the world. You described business in general. Let me do this, and this is not throat clearing. I think this is worth saying. I genuinely find Richard Sherman a very interesting person. He says unpredictable things. He says things that you wouldn't expect, as though a talking points list was given to him. He seems to be independently thinking, and therefore I want to listen to him, and I respect what he has to say. And the ultimate sign of respect in my mind is not blind agreement, but pointing out where you're wrong. And as I've said several times on the show, in that way, he reminds me of Stephen A. Stephen A. will be unpredictable, say what he thinks, isn't beholden to any particular expectation of him. And the sign of respect to give someone in that scenario is to then tell them where they're wrong. And that's what I would say with Richard Sherman is you're just being a little naive. I mean, or you're being childish and bellyaching. I mean, the world works by incentive. The world works by people getting value out of each other, and that's specifically what the business world is. It is about the bottom line. Show me the business that's not. Is it NPR? Is that where we're going to go? Should the NFL run like public radio? Business is about making money. So what? The NFL is. And yes, every business, including ESPN, the NFL, and the corner store with their employees, will use you up and replace you when there's somebody better and cheaper.
But that's not...
That's the world. Don't complain about it. If Richard Sherman's just recognizing it,
right,
fine, that's great. But I don't think he's just recognizing it, Max. I think he's lamenting it. He's painting the NFL as a villain, which is a very popular and easy thing to do these days.
Look, I agree. We're not breaking new ground here. He's stating the obvious. But there's a difference between the NFL and, say, the NBA, because tackle football is dangerous, and therefore it's not like a Marxist argument where it's like all work is exploitation. No, some work is more exploitative than others. I work in the boxing industry. I recognize fans and networks are essentially exploiting boxers. That's essentially what's going on. It doesn't make it, it's a guilty pleasure, fine, whatever. Am I a hypocrite? Whatever. I like watching boxing, nevertheless, and I'm a consumer of it and an advocate for it. But I recognize that it is exploiting fighters. Same thing in football. It exploits labor differently than basketball, for example, because it's dangerous. Just like coal mining exploits labor differently than bartending. You know, it's more exploitative because it's dangerous. And so if someone who works in a dangerous industry in which labor will always necessarily be exploited differently because of the risks it poses to their health, then another industry points that out, particularly in an industry where you have like the NFL cares and you see a heart beating on the screen. What does that have to do with football? But the NFL on some level has recognized that, boy, we better get out in the community and show how good we are because we are exploiting these players. I think it is different than simply saying, hey, this is the nature of business.
I want to let Stephen A. in, but I've got a rebuttal. You want to jump in?
Go ahead,
My
Will.
rebuttal
Go ahead.
is this. It's the definition of exploiting someone is not the level of danger in their employment. This football, just like coal mining, is a matter of choice. The people that go into that industry have a choice to go into that industry. They do so voluntarily. And it's a little bit hard to stomach that it's this awful exploitative business that, oh, by the way, you're getting paid millions to do. It's a little hard to compare the NFL to coal mining in that way. I would say...
I'm making the analogy between the NFL and NBA, coal mining to bartending. I'm not saying the NFL
And I'm
coal
telling
mining.
you, the definition of exploitive isn't that it's dangerous. It's rather whether or not you're forced or fraudulently guided into something. And I don't think these players are. I think they're choosing to go into the NFL. I think everybody in the world wants a villain. Life is easier with villains. It gives you definition and meaning to point out bad guys. But the guy that has created a game for you that creates millions of dollars of potential employment might not just be your villain.
Talk to NFL players. If any of them could play in the NBA, or the vast majority of young athletes or athletes who thought they may have a choice would choose the NBA over the NFL. You have longer careers, you get paid more, you have guaranteed contracts, and it's not as dangerous.
TV
you play
stars,
the NFL because you can.
TV stars would choose to be movie stars. That's no point of exploitation that they're not.
Well, because you're denying the level of physical danger and whether or not that plays into an equation of exploitation, which I think it does.
Will, I appreciate your point of view. I understand it, and I feel the same way about a lot of things that you say. And there's nothing but respect, you know, in terms of disagreeing with you. I like that. It doesn't bother me at all. I get upset when people get on folks like yourself and others just because you have a different perspective. That's nonsense. And I totally agree with your assessment, how you classified me. But let me be very, very clear. I think in this particular situation, you're missing the boat. You are absolutely right with what you say as it pertains to the business of corporate America and how it's a bit exploitative, but so what? Because you know what you're getting into. You're being paid to provide a service, et cetera, et cetera. No matter what line of business you're talking about, corporate America, you're in the business to make money. That's the way that it goes. I think when you see somebody like Richard Sherman stepping up and lamenting the state of affairs that exist as it pertains to player relationships with the NFL, it primarily involves the hypocrisy, because you can be about the business of making money without being a hypocrite. If somebody makes you money by being a professional and taking care of their end of the bargain and you're profiting off of it, that should be that. But on far too many occasions, particularly with the NFL, even more so than the traditional corporate America entity, the fact remains is that they don't stop there. Professional sports don't tend to stop there. They've now asked athletes to be more than just marquee athletes who are marketable and thus can assist in them buffering their wallets and padding their wallets and making more money. Now they're asking them to essentially be role models and parents and help parenting kids and help us raise these kids, not just to conduct yourself in a certain fashion, but do so in a manner that we are receptive to, because we define whether or not we like it or not. You might have people that are against Colin Kaepernick, for example, Will. It's not stopping the NFL from making money. It's not stopping the NFL product from being supported. You might have guys that may not know how to act, might get themselves in trouble with the law or whatever the case may be. But then they'll go to court, the case will be resolved or whatever the case may be. But then they turn around and you're lamenting those state of affairs. Of course, I'm not talking about anything extreme like domestic violence and murder and stuff like that. But I'm saying every little thing these guys do, they're under a microscope. And even though it doesn't negatively influence the bottom line, you're still riding them because you want to approve of every little thing they do. And it ain't just about how they play and how well they market themselves. You then want to dictate other facets of their life and how they disseminate a particular image or perception about themselves. You want to have control in manipulating all of those things. So when you do that, but then you engage in hypocrisy in the minds of those players you are exploiting, you now have raised their ire and their angst against you because they're looking at you and saying, when does it stop? You don't say that about everybody in corporate America, not every entity in corporate America. But at times, players have been able to say that about the NFL, and that's where the problem lies.
You know, I'll just make this final point, guys. Is the NFL somehow has become the boogeyman of everything. And I don't know why. Maybe it's the concussion issue. Maybe I think it has to do with football's dominance in America sports. I think that its inherently masculine and violent nature has somehow managed to become the embodiment of evil. You're going to look up one day as you keep calling football bad. You're going to look up one day and keep calling it evil, and you're going to see the ratings go down. And you're going to see the NFL suffer. By the way, ratings aren't going so good right now.
Yeah.
And then we're going to
right.
have a world where football might not be so good. Do you want that world? Does Richard Sherman want that world? I'd say football right now isn't the villain you want it to be.
It's not football, it's the NFL, because it's this monolith in American culture. And so you're absolutely right. It
That
takes
doesn't
shots
stop.
out of proportion to what it deserves. And yet here, Richard Sherman, by your own admission to begin with, is simply describing a real relationship between owners and players.
Listen, we do have to go to break. Obviously, you're all cerebral men, so is Richard Sherman, and that was a really intelligent conversation. Listening to all you guys had strong takes on it, and I know it's probably just the beginning of more conversations on this subject and the ratings, for that matter, as well, how they're affected. You brought up a good point there as well. Will, thank you so much
Always
for
fun.
being with us.